I think we should get started. So if you could please take your seats, and and we'll begin. I'm David Berger from the Bernard Revel Graduate School, which is sponsoring this talk. Let me say from the outset that the real sponsor of this talk is the Zoltan Areni Charitable Fund, which we are connected to through Svi Areni from the library, which has been sponsoring a talk annually related to Hungarian Jewry. And obviously we are very thankful to the fund and to Svi for arranging this, or making it possible. The Satmar Rov is an extremely attractive personality, as the crowd here testifies. The fact that you are here tells me that I don't need to say very much about him. He is known to almost all Orthodox Jews as an anti-Zionist, as a Kana'i, as a person who went so far as to tell his followers after the '67 war that they should not go to the Kotel when it is under Zionist control. When he came to the United States, he brought with him a very powerful force toward what could be called traditionalism, but as I think we'll hear tonight, is not necessarily such traditionalism. There was once a film that I'm sure some of you saw, a kind of documentary about Hasidic life or Hasidism in the United States, and one of its more interesting protagonists was a Satmar proprietor of a fish store. Does anybody remember that film?
A Life Apart.
A Life Apart, right. And for my favorite line from that fish store proprietor, who in many respects stole the movie, was an exchange in which he said that someone came to the Satmar Rov shortly after he came to the United States and said to him, "Du hast Kailje gemacht Amerika," which means you have spoiled America. And he said that the Satmar Rov replied, "Ich habe nicht Kailje gemacht Amerika." I did not spoil America, aber ich will Kailje machen, but I will spoil it. The sharpness of the Satmar Rov could be demonstrated in many, many lines, which I will discipline myself uncharacteristically and refrain from saying. I will add, though, that a modern Orthodox rabbi who held important positions in the modern Orthodox community was involved with the Orthodox caucus, actually directed it for a while, and then became the chaplain at Mount Sinai, at University Hospital. And I spoke to him some months after he was there, and he said that he devoted the first Yom Kippur after he took that job to doing tshuva for all the negative things he had ever said about Satmar. Because the Satmar Bikur Cholim was, and still is, an organization of such power and such value that went beyond the boundaries of the Satmar community, despite the Satmar community's insularity. There is a dimension to the Satmar Rov that transcends the superficialities of Kanaut and sharpness. And we have a speaker today who is more than qualified to plumb the depths of aspects of the Satmar Rov's thought. Dr. David Sorotzkiin, as you have seen if you've read this, is a scholar and critic of modernity, religion, and secularization, and the politics of identity in Judaism from the late Middle Ages to contemporary times. His doctorate is from the Hebrew University. He is a senior faculty member at Ono Academic College. His published work so far is called Orthodoxy and Modern Disciplination, a word that I learned from the title of this book, the production of the Jewish tradition in Europe in modern times. And his forthcoming book is The Making of Normative Judaism, Canonization, Censorship, and Social Engineering in Late Medieval Spain. It's a pleasure to introduce him.
Thank you. It is a great pleasure and privilege to be in this historical and important institution. I would like to warmly thank Professor David Berger for his kind invitation, and Dean Professor Berger and Vice Dean Professor Mordechai Cohen, and also Sarah Enatwersky for coordinating my visit. And I welcome you all. My lecture will be delivered to several sections. First, I will make some opening remarks about orthodoxy, radical orthodoxy, and their connection with other social and ideological phenomena in the Jewish world. Then I will address the relation between early orthodoxy and early national trends. Eventually, I will examine the deconstructionist project of the Satmar Rov in his book Vayoel Moshe, the structure of the book, and the author's intentions. The first half of the lecture will be theoretical in essence, and the second part demonstrative.
Speaking to the mic, please. Could someone
Okay.
point the mic in your
Maybe I will fix the volume. Is that better now? Yes? Or should I? Okay, now better? Okay. In my previous research, I have argued that orthodoxy in Judaism is a modern and manifold phenomenon that developed out of medieval sources. Among the processes which accompanied its formation, one could note canonization, codification, polemics, alienation and estrangements, and conceptual and social cohesion. These processes parallel processes of what is called in scholarship the confessionalization of European society from the early modern period. Confessionalization means, in its essence, is a strong cohesion between state, church, and collective. My goal today is to assess different aspects of the phenomenon referred to by scholars as Ultra-Orthodoxy and consider its connections to other phenomena in the Jewish world. I will also reflect on the degree of continuity as well as the deep transformation in the relation to this phenomenon, which is represented by the Satmar Rov. This transformation is almost the construction of the orthodoxy, which detaches it from its national foundations or elements. I prefer to refer to the range of ideologies included under the term ultra-orthodox as radical orthodoxy. The reason that I prefer this term is that it is linked to my understanding of orthodoxy as a process, not a reaction. Much like secularization, this process occurs throughout the modern period, both early and late. By the term radical, I mean the radicalization of basic themes within this process. Orthodoxy can be radical to the same degree that there can be a radical secularism, which claims to be the conclusion of a process of secularization and thus narrowly defines the later. Radicalism aspires to reach a conclusion of a process with which it is not necessarily identical. It thus attempts to give meaning to the process, a meaning which could be artificial or invented. At the basis of radical orthodoxy, as it has been known since the 19th century, stands the demand for social, religious separation from the range of phenomena inside and outside the Jewish world. Separation is to be expressed in choice of habitation, clothing, language, as well as in the concept of halakha, costume or minhag, and ritual practice. These demands are accompanied by a feeling of stasis, as if the demand for mobility and movement within the Maskilic and Reform circle arose a counter-reaction of stasis from the Orthodox. This is an accepted description of Ultra-Orthodoxy. It is correct, but also, in my opinion, only partial. In an attempt to understand the historical, ideological, and even social dynamics of radical orthodoxy, I believe that we need to leave aside the context of the 19th century for a while and to penetrate deeply into the chaotic and at times ambivalent source materials from the early modern period. For orthodoxy, in its many varieties, is in its deepest sense a byproduct of the rise of civil society and its demands on the Jews. This is my understanding of late orthodoxy. If so, a fuller understanding requires paying careful attention to the mechanisms and ideological products which accompanied the rise of the absolutist state from the 16th century to the 19th. In the first part of my lecture, I will attempt to track these products and the complex and contradictory developments which laid the basis for radical orthodoxy. Following traditional Christian paths, the absolutist state in Central Europe needed Jews, but also wanted to produce the presence of Jews as a separate social group, located constantly on and sometimes over the border of humiliation. Therefore, various cities enacted laws to separate Jews from their genital environment. Jewish communities enacted similar rules on a voluntary basis. Jewish thought, for its part, created conceptual and ideological mechanisms which were intended to justify and give transcendental significance to the situation of Jewish separation. In parallel, there was an internal demand to separate Jews from different types of study, of secular, philosophical, or external wisdoms, chokhmot chitzoniyot, which were understood as contaminating the pure Jewish canon. I have previously shown that the thought of Maharal of Prague reflects the marginal status of Jews in the early modern period. At the center of his system, as I have shown, is the concept of the separate, hanivdal, התיאולוגיה של הנבדל, the theology of the separate. And at its basis is an uncompromising demand to remove all external factors understood as agents of pollution from the Jewish canon and the Jewish social body. I have further examined the reception of Maharal and the interpretation of his thought in different contexts, and particularly in Hasidism. It is no surprise that Maharal thought, which reflects centralized political structure and the economic political apparatus of court Jews. Maharal, it should be remembered, was close to the court Jew Mordechai Meisel, resurfaced in Hasidism in the period following the partition of Poland, when centralized state mechanisms began to put pressure on the Jews within their territories. There was particularly massive pressure on the Jews of Galicia, who fell into the realm of the Austro-Hungarian of the Austrian Empire. Indeed, the radical orthodoxy of the 19th century, which developed mostly among the Hasidim, arose in parallel with other Jewish ideologies in Galicia. The key point here is the transition from a separation, which was half voluntary and half involuntary, as in the early modern period, to separation which was almost entirely voluntary, as reflected in the various forms of Haredi orthodoxy until today. But that is not the entire story. From the rise of the civil society until the Shoah, the Holocaust, European society continued to apply mechanisms of estrangement and rejections to its Jews. These mechanisms, and their psychological products, were subtly described by Hannah Arendt. The Jew who was made a pariah by formal mechanisms in the period of absolutism continued to exist in semi-formally and eventually informally alienation in the period of enlightened absolutism and the age of revolutions and nationalism. Parenthetically, I believe that this provides an important insight into the dynamic of the Jewish world, whether religious or secular, to the present day. Now, the figure of Rabbi Yoel Teutelbaum, the Satmar Rov, interested me from the start of my university studies. It was therefore only natural for me when I began my graduate studies that I wanted to write about his ideas. Reading the writing of the Satmar Rov and other Orthodox writers eventually led me to write about much broader subjects. In the course of my master degree, I read the book Vayoel Moshe from beginning to end. It should be noted that Vayoel Moshe, much like The Capital of Marx, is a book that has followers but very seldom is being read even by its followers. This is one of the things which drew my attention was that the author showed a self-awareness of a rabbinic genealogy to which he attributed his ideas, one which extends over centuries and which began well before the 19th century. I quickly saw that this was not exceptional. In other earlier radical Orthodox texts, there are similar genealogies. Take, for example, the ideas of Tzvi Elimelech Shapira, died in 1841, the Rebbe of Dinov, an influential Hasidic figure in this radical Orthodox circle, and to my opinion, the founding father of 19th century radical Orthodox Hasidic Orthodoxy. In all his composition, and especially in his Ma'ayan Ganim, a commentary on the work of Rabbi Yosef Yaabetz, one of the Spanish exiles. Yavetz or Chaim considered the question of why Sephardic Jewry was destroyed. In parallel, Shapira's commentary on the book considered the destruction and dissolution, in his opinion, of the Judaism of his generation, and the way to preserve the remnant of Israel. Or consider Akiva Yosef Schlesinger. He died in 1922 in his book Pe'amei Lev Ha'ivri Be'eretz Hagar, which includes a sort of anthology of relevant Orthodox writings. This book is in fact an ethnic Jewish manifesto which occupies the border between radical Hardism and economically productive nationalism. In the course of my reading, it became clear to me that these texts reveal different archaeological strata which are composed of the self-consciousness of many writers. In general, these writers aim at the restoration of the Jewish reality to its imagined pure state, which preceded, in their opinion, the processes of destruction and degradation which subsequently affected it. Since restoration was already a key concept in the establishment of modern consciousness by the time of the Renaissance, this text stimulated my thought and led me to more seriously consider the picture of reality they propose and the real historical connections between different archaeological layers which are revealed therein. Key figures who take part in this restorative project from the early modern period in different ways and with different ideologies span from the generation of the Spanish expulsion through figures like the aforementioned Rabbi Yehuda Loew, the Maharal of Prague, on the one hand, he who formulated the concept of irreducible Jewish difference, as I said, and proposed a comprehensive reform at yeshiva study curriculum. Or Rabbi Yosef Karo, on the other hand, who created a halachic project directed at all Jewish communities on the basis of his extreme messianic motivation focused on the land of Israel. And Rabbi Isaiah Horowitz, the author of Shnei Luchot HaBrit, or the Shla, the greatest modern architect of conduct or Hanagot literature and the religious engineering of Jewish life. These figures initiated unifying processes through religious codes and the popular engineering of Jewish life alongside a Jewish ontology of difference based on anti-integrationism and anti-assimilationism. In parallel, Messianism subdivided between these figures in two branches: a postponed Messianism for the Maharal, an extreme Messianism for Caro in his diaries, and a call for full Jewish life in the land of Israel and the use of the Holy Tongue as an ultimate manifestation of the ethos of the conduct literature for Horowitz. In other historical strata which take part in this historical dialectic, one should consider the opponents to Sabbatianism, particularly Rabbi Yaakov Emden, and afterwards figures such as Rabbi Eliyahu the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Moses Sofer, the Khatam Sofer, and the previously mentioned Rabbi Tzvi Elimelech Shapira of Dinov. A conceptual and ideological genealogy which lies at the basis of the radical Orthodox Hardist trends, this is Shapira, in Galicia and Hungary, stretches from the Rebbe of Dinov until the school of the Satmar Rov himself. It should be noted the Rebbe of Dinov is also the great-grandfather of the Munkacher Rebbe. He is the founding father of this dynasty. All of the figures I mentioned and others functioned in different historical contexts and were driven by different interests. The ideological opponents who they struggled with also differed from period to period. However, the commonality between all of them lies in their wish for a restoration of Judaism to its earlier stage out of an opposition to regressive and destabilizing historical process which threatened, in their opinion, to dissolve the structure of Jewish existence. Now let's focus on some ideas that are being held in, some more ideas that are being held in these schools. Now we shall address once again difference or separation and historical regression, which are basically major terms in these groups. I already mentioned the separateness of Judaism in Maharal and Prague. In conjunction, there emerged regressive conception of time which sees history as a constant descent from a prior enlightened state toward the catastrophe of the present moment. This conception of time was espoused by Rabbi Moshe Cordovero of Sfat, who saw history as a gradual, deterministic, and linear descent of the community of Israel to the depths, the place of the heel of the primordial Adam. The heel represents the footstep of the Messiah, Akev, heel, Akev, Beikveta de Mashiach, the footstep of the Messiah, which is how Cordovero interprets the rabbinic dictum of Tractat Sota, that in the time of the footstep of the Messiah, brazenness will increase. Beikveta de Mashiach, chutzpah isge. The idea of regressive history continued to develop in different contexts among European Jews towards the end of the modern period, towards the late modern period. Emden, for example, wrote in the 1740s that Israel's historical descent and Jewish suffering express an alchemical historical process of refining gold from dross, which moved towards the production of pure gold in the end of time. In Emden, we can find formulated many aspects of modern Hardism, even if in rude form, including the demand for basic Jewish difference in clothing and language, an emphasis on the importance of separating Jewish society from European society, and settling on settling in the land of Israel, and a systematic critique of a range of decadent cultural factors which, in his opinion, destabilize Jewish society. Another example for the regressive time conception from the Vilna Gaon. In his commentary on Zoharic text Sifra de Tzniuta, Jewish history is comparable to the process of the decomposition of a corpse. The moment of death corresponds to the destruction of the temple. In the time of the Babylonian academies, the dead body was still whole. In the scattered Jewish communities of the Middle Ages represent the decomposition of the body. However, in the present, all that remains of Jewish existence is a cup of dust, tarvad rakav, a lump of dirt from which one can only expect the resurrection of the dead. Here too, the footstep of the Messiah serves as a key concept in the description of contemporary catastrophe. And in general, the phrase functioned as a typological description of the present moment among many writers in the post-Sebastian age, including, as I said, Emden, Shapira, and several other Hasidic figures, and of course, the Satmar Rov himself, which used the term extensively. The force of the binary opposition which I encountered in these ideas, which were formulated in the 18th century, their opposition to conception of enlightenment and especially to the idea of progress, led me to initially situate them in the wider European context of modernization through anti-enlightenment. It took me some time until I understood that the picture was much more complicated. In fact, Orthodoxy, as I said, was a central avenue of modernization among the Jews throughout the modern period. These modernization processes included order, discipline or disciplination, and the engineering of everyday life, of emotional life, of the realm of the sacred and profane, and even of labor. The splittering of Judaism beginning in the last quarter of the 18th century into opposing and defined ideological camps was a product of the politicization of Judaism. This occurred with the partition of Poland between the centralized empires of Austria, Prussia, and Russia, with the ascent of enlightened absolutism, and with the modern state's manipulation of Jewish communities through aggressive legislation and the discourse of emancipation. The struggles between different Jewish groups over the question of if and how to integrate into these new political and social trends birthed opposing ideologies and bitter conflicts, out of which were formed large Jewish movements which we know today: Haredi Judaism, enlightened Orthodoxy, enlightened Reform, and its various forms, and eventually Jewish nationalism. The great similarity between all those trends in their early stages informs us of a social and intellectual crucible out of which they were born. Over the course of the 19th century, gradually, each of these movements rid itself of the religious and social characteristics of its opponents. The totality of these processes burst a tangle of stereotypes which accompany Jewish society and its internal arguments until this very day. As I mentioned, the similarity between all these modern Jewish groups or movements lies in the urge towards social and subjective engineering. In these framework, processes of halachic codification worked alongside the spread of ethical and conduct literature to engineer and organize frameworks for Jewish existence, from the internalization of discipline of religious life among large segments of the population to transformation of the traditional methods of learning. Just one more theoretical note. In the formation of modern Jewish identities, I locate three stages. The ascetic stage, in the course of which rabbinic culture created a discipline of communal life aimed at a wide segment of the population. The cosmopolitan stage, in the course of which European Judaism entered into the debate about emancipation. And the national stage, which announced the failure of an emancipation and the aspiration for national solution. In my understanding, the foundation of Haredi Judaism are already rooted in the ascetic stage and precede Jewish enlightenment, and in fact constitute its platform and base. The cosmopolitan stage covers the emergence of the Haskalah in the face of enlightened absolutism, while the national stage announced the ascent of Jewish nationalism. All three of these stages act both diachronically and synchronically. That is, no stage negates the prior stage, but rather exists alongside it in complex and continuous reciprocal relations and/or through polemics and with the advancement of clashing ideological agendas. How did the continuous construction of Orthodox and proto-Haredi trends provide a platform for the other modern Jewish movements, including the Haskalah and nationalism? In order to answer this question, we must first clarify the question, what is Hardism? And what the historical processes birthed it. The study of Hardism as a historical phenomena remains, in my opinion, in its infancy. Yet this is perhaps the most important field of research in modern Jewish historiography, which can illuminate many aspects of modern Judaism which were ignored first by enlightened, then by national, and today mostly by liberal perspectives. I define Hardism as follows. Hardism is a general term for historical social phenomenon based on voluntary ascetic practices and on expansion of the sacred function in everyday life, as opposed to secular function. In other words, Hardism is based on ever-increasing expansion of the zone of holiness into profane life. As I already mentioned, this process is latent in modern branches of rabbinic literature and of Musar and conduct literature. And they shaped central aspects of development of Haredi Judaism. They shaped a central aspect of the development of Haredi Judaism, and in parallel, without any contradiction, reflected the penetration of the civilizing process, as the phrase made by Norbert Elias, in Jewish society, and its manifestation in the context of discipline of life and forms of conduct, which would eventually characterize the bourgeoisie and the middle class too. On this point, Hardism appears as an amplification of the ascetic and disciplinary foundation of bourgeoisie society, and that thus relates to both religious differentiation and separation, as well as rationalization and secularization. Those two paths sometimes work together and sometimes parted away. I will now address the question of ascetic trends or early Haredic ascetic trends and proto-nationalism, demonstrating it especially through the segments written in Shnei Luchot HaBrit, Ashla, which the Satmar Rebbe himself relates to in his Ma'amar Leshon HaKodesh, in his essay on the Holy Tongue, and dismantle completely the author's intention. Afterwards, I will move forward to demonstrate how basically all the previous national elements in Vayoel Moshe are being dismantled and deconstructized, and held as a by the Satmar Rebbe himself. Okay, in the context of the secularization of Jewish society in modernity, through the popularization of Kabbalah and the spread of ethical and rabbinic conduct literature, the basic element of nationalism were increasingly sanctified. In particular, formulation of national history, the sacralization of the land of Israel, and attempts to establish the Holy Tongue as practical language which expands the boundaries of holiness in the present moment. Let us look, for example, at the remarks of the Baal Ashla, one of the most important proponents of these trends about the Holy Tongue. Even regarding things which must be spoken about, men of action are accustomed to not speak on Shabbat, even about necessary things, except in the Holy Tongue, and not in profane language, for the day is holy to our Lord. And Shabbat is a sign between the blessed God and ourselves. Therefore, one should speak the Holy Tongue, only speak the Holy Tongue, even if he is forced to speak. Fortunate is one who accustoms himself to speak the Holy Tongue even during the week. For the spiritual level of the Holy Tongue has no limits. Just as the Torah in its root is entirely divine names, as in the secret of the Holy Tongue, which I explained above, and it descended in the same way and became corporeal, so too is the performance of the commandments, which man does and live by them, and life of the souls, the 60,000 souls of Israel, which derive from the 60,000 letters of the Torah. The written Torah is the Holy Tongue, as we explained, and the Oral Torah is the Aramaic translation, which is close to the Holy Tongue. This is the secret of reading twice and translating once. The reading in the written Torah, which includes two, and the translation only one. And he set me down in darkness. This is Babylonian Talmud, as in Babylonian Talmud Sanhedrin 24a. This is the translation. But the land of Israel is on its level in the secret of the Holy Tongue, and the created world in the secret of the Holy Tongue. The Shla long discussions are the most detailed theological discussion which expose the national connection between the people to the land of Israel, to the land and language. Settlement in the land of Israel and speaking the Holy Tongue, not only in Shabbat but also during the week, is understood by the Shla as an activization of the primordial collective principle, as the manifestation of a situation which will be universal in the future, even in the present moment. The Shla sees the importance of the land of Israel in the fulfillment of the primordial constitution in all its details, and the conversation in the Holy Tongue. The Jewish constitution expresses a utopian political situation which existed in the past and which will return in the future. The Holy Tongue and the land of Israel are drawn from the same source, which is the defining principle of the collective unity. Language is connected to the divine unity and the election of the collective, and is revealed in the connection of the souls of Israel, which are being above and which divide in bodies below. The ontological connection between the nation, the land, and language in the Shla thus organizes the meta-principle of the collective stance, and even explains the history of the establishment of the nation, its collective autonomy, its exile and diaspora, and its future return to the land of Israel. The establishment of the collective being of Israel in the future is, of course, a sign of salvation of the entire world. This is because the geographic component, the collective component, and the linguistic component, which are all primordial divine units, will be present in the world through the nation of Israel dwelling in its land. This is, of course, a theological utopia, but it is not merely a futuristic or hypothetical situation. At the basis of the Shla's secularizing tendencies is the demand to concretize this perfection in the present moment. The anthropology, Torat HaAdam of the Shla, is a utopian teaching about the redemptive future and extended to the present moment through the extension of the holy in the profane. The holiness which spreads through the daily action of the Jew in his speech, in his business dealing, etc., represent the perfection of the primordial situation which extend into the world through emanatory connections. The linguistic geographic collective model, which represent the unity of the holy things, descends through everyday human action. In this way, present-day existence is connected with the utopian national existence, which includes the unity of the historical collective source, the ontological holiness, and the national utopia. This is a point which cannot be over-exaggerated because the central role of the Shla in the construction of modern Jewish subject in the face of range of civilizational, aesthetic, economic, and bourgeoisie trend, as I mentioned before. I went on some lengths about the Shla because he takes central place in the Satmar Rov discussion of the Holy Tongue, which deconstructs and evade the author's original intentions. For the Satmar Rov, the primordial source of language, around which the Shla wove his long discussion, establishes the lack of possibility for it to become national historic language. I will return to this point immediately. Now, the Satmar Rov. Radical orthodoxy, like orthodoxy in general, is based on historical development which combine canonization with the censorship of previous religious tendencies, which seems to have lost their potency in the face of changing historical circumstances. This censorship includes previous forms of orthodoxy which cease to be appropriate into the context of given halachic authorities or interpreters. The Satmar Rov, who was most active in the first 2 decades after the establishment of the State of Israel, he was less active in the last decade of his life after suffering a stroke, is a clearly representative of this trend. The early biography of the Satmar Rov in the period between the 1930s to the beginning of the 1950s is complex and raises many questions, which I will not address here. In this part of the lecture, I will refer to the Teitelbaum main book, Vayoel Moshe, which was written in the first decade of the existence of the State of Israel and first published in 1959. In order to understand the uniqueness of the book, we must understand the tight connection between its structure and those elements of orthodoxy which Teitelbaum wanted to censor and purge. These were the very elements which religious nationalism through the generations before and after Zionism had attempted to amplify. The three essays of the book deal with those rabbinic principles which underlie, in the opinion of various interpretators, the halachic and Haggadic formation of the nation. Those principles are the collective, history, and redemption in the essay on the three voles, Ma'amar Shalosh Shavuot, territory in the essay of the settlement of the land of Israel, Ma'amar Yeshuv Eretz Israel, and the last national language in the essay on the Holy Tongue. These three elements, of course, history and as the redemptive force, yes, territory and language constitute a national entity. In the essay of the three voles, Teitelbaum presents severe and ontological concept of exile galut, which cannot be undone. In the essay on the settlement on the land of Israel, he purges the essay purges residents in the land of Israel from any obligatory halachic status. The final essay undermines the status of the Holy Tongue. From the perspective of Teitelbaum's working methods, the book should be described as eclectic, in the sense that it negates the orthodox hierarchies which formed in rabbinic texts over centuries of development and through the interpretation and resolution of contradiction between different authorities. The Satmar Rov make use of examples from various texts in a way which divorces them from their wider context. Through this example, he creates a non-hierarchical jigsaw puzzle of quotes and analysis which create a new and unique theological and halachic combination. Now, if we refer to the halachic discourse of the central rabbinic position mainly between the 18th to the 20th century as rabbinic modernism, the Teitelbaum text should reflect a kind of post-modernism rabbinic literature. To the best of my knowledge, it is the only text of this type in rabbinic literature. It could be that the time of the book's composition in the 50s, in the decade and a half after the Second World War, somehow influenced the book's final form. In the secular culture of the United States, this period witnessed the authors and artists of the Beat Generation, who construed the literacy act as one of constant movement and expansion into space without any goal, in a sort of secular exile in the expanses of America. The most famous example, of course, is Jack Kerouac on the Road. The feeling of aimless movement in space created a form of secular exile which perhaps recalls the movement of trains in the Second World War from the home to the battlefields of Europe or to the vanishing point. This is a movement which evaluated and estimated the entirety of life vis-à-vis lack and absence. In parallel, in the Jewish context, this feeling recalled the movement of trains from the cities of Europe to the concentration camps. These movements dissolved areas of meaning and old connections and left the post-war Haredi Jew naked and bare, naked from the national salvation of the survivors and bare of the world which had disappeared. The radicalism of Vayoel Moshe, which sometimes seems to attempt to establish Judaism as a ghostly phenomenon, bare of concrete foundation, must therefore be placed in relation to the vanishing point of the Second World War and the Shoah, and the destruction of previous framework. This is similar to other texts of the period, such as previously mentioned Book of Roach. In the Jewish national context, one could look at Uri Tzvi Greenberg's Rechovot HaNahar. One might also mention, in a theoretical context, Karl Levitt, meaning in history, which criticized the Christian conception of secularized history, or Adorno and Horkheimer's Dialectic of Enlightenment, with its sharp but hopeless neo-Marxist critique of the capitalist culture industry. The eclectic mosaic of Teitelbaum's book is composed of fragments of other texts. Alongside rabbinic literature, the Talmud, its commentators, and halachic literature, he brings quotes from Bachya ibn Pakuda, just to name some, Chovot HaLevavot, Abraham ibn Ezra, Maimonides' Guide of the Perplexed, Isaac Aram Akedat Yitzchak, and Sefer Haridim. He quotes from Lurianic Kabbalistic writings, from the Shla, Yaakov Sasportas, Chacham Tzvi, Yaakov Emden, Chaim Yosef David Azulai, the Vilna Gaon, the Dinover Rebbe, the Chatam Sofer, and others. All of these sources help him establish the theological foundation which underlie what he sees as halachic obligations. Yet, all the while, he shows a disregard for the hierarchies of authority which emerged among the Acharonim, the modern Jewish authorities. What is particularly impressive about Teitelbaum's book is its disregard of or counter-reaction to entire body of late rabbinic literature out of his attempt to neutralize the nationalistic elements which developed therein. This tendency is particularly apparent in the essay on the settlement of the land of Israel, B'ma'amar Yishuv Eretz Israel. In this essay, Teitelbaum's aim is to purge the history of halacha of the deep influence of Nachmanides, a Ramban position that the commandments to settle the land of Israel is of biblical origin. Nachmanides referred to a range of rabbinic sources, including the rule that all ascend to the land of Israel, Hakol Ma'alin L'Eretz Israel, from the end of Traktat Ketuvot. The source of the commandments in Nachmanides' presentation is a verse about the inheritance of the land. And you shall drive out the inhabitants of the land and dwell there, for to you I have given the land to possess it. Both in his comments on Maimonides' list of commandments and his biblical commentary, Nachmanides connects the positive commandments to inherit the land and to settle in it with those halachic midrashic sources which refer positively to the inheritance of the land. I will just quote briefly Nachmanides. I say that this commandment which the rabbis praise, which is inhabiting the land, and even beyond the great praise said about it, stems from these positive commandments. Likewise, in his Torah commentary, he writes that our Rebbe praised the settlement of the land of Israel and said that he is forbidden to leave it, and that if we do so, we will be judged as to be rebellious, like the wife who does not want to ascend the land with her husband. And likewise, for a man, we were commanded about this. Nachmanides has linked a different source and rule in rabbinic literature to the commandment to settle the land of Israel. This became a foundational principle for many halachic decisors, whether regarding the laws about the settlement of the land of Israel, about coercing one's spouse to move to the land of Israel, or about the prohibition to leave the land. Almost all rabbinic discussions which follow Nachmanides consider whether this commandment is of biblical or rabbinic origin. The modern period is marked by an emphasis on the essential holiness of the land, partially due to the spreading influence of Kabbalistic ideas. If so, Teitelbaum is struggling against the idea of continuing commandment to settle the land, a commandment which supports the aspiration of the historical nation to manifest itself on its sacred territory. This factor, combined with the renewal of Hebrew language, fills out the three necessary conditions for the definition of Jewish nation. 1. Naturalistic redemption, Geula b'derech hateva, which is based on Maimonides' conception of Messianic age, itself based on Amor HaShmuel's statement in the Babylonian Talmud that there is no difference between this age and the Messianic age except for subjugation of kingdoms. 2. The continuing connection and halachic obligation to the land of Israel based on Nachmanides. 3. The restoration of the Holy Tongue as a spoken language based on countless Kabbalistic and proto-national discussion of its elevated spiritual status. All of these are based on canonical rabbinic literature. The Satmar Rov tactic in the essay on the settlement of the land of Israel is based first and foremost on the creation of deep, insoluble contradiction between Maimonides and Nachmanides, as well as a systematic rejection of many later opinions which attempts to resolve the contradiction and to establish settling the land as a central principle in rabbinic Judaism. One of the early such attempts as resolution to resolve this the disputation between Maimonides and Nachmanides was Yitzhak de Leon, 15th century Megillat Esther, for example, which responded to Nachmanides' clause on Maimonides' Book of Commandment. In his composition, de Leon argued that Maimonides omitted the commandment to settle the land of Israel because it only applies when the temple is standing, and thus in the future Messianic age. At the present moment, Jews are obliged by the laws of exile and 3 oaths. De Leon assumed that Maimonides agrees that the settlement of the land is a biblical obligation, but it is not applicable in present, and therefore he committed it from his halachic decisions. This was not accepted position in general, but it opens window onto the ways which some early modern rabbis try to claim Maimonides held that there was a command to settle the land that was only rabbinic, not biblical in origin. One prominent and influential form of the 19th century which forwarded these ideas and tried to unite the position of Maimonides and Nachmanides is no other than Khatam Sofer. In his responsa 234 in Shut Khatam Sofer, Chelek Yoreh De'ah, this responsa deals with the question of the superiority of Jerusalem to other locations in the land of Israel. It develops the idea of the superiority based on the essential holiness of Jerusalem as the peak of expression of the essential holiness of the land of Israel. The responsa was first written to one of Khatam Sofer's students who moved to the land of Israel as part of the wave of Aliyah in the 19th century, which also included Hasidim and the disciples of the Vilna Gaon. It should be remembered that the old Yishuv HaYashan, is in many ways established by these immigrations. The Khatam Sofer responsa influenced Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Kalisher, who quoted it in the beginning of his Drishat Zion. Kalisher, as is well known, was a student of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, Sofer's father-in-law. Eiger even transmitted Kalisher's discussion of the possibility of offering the Korban Pesach, which can be offered if, like in the present, the entire community is ritually impure. To the Khatam Sofer, he forwarded this question to the Khatam Sofer. Kalisher wanted a renewal of annual sacrifice as part of his messianic national renaissance, and a arousal from below, Itaruta deletata, and as part of the vision of productive agriculture as the basis for redemption. Sofer confirmed to Eiger that the Pesach offering could be offered without any concern for technical halachic disagreements about the precise dimensions of priestly garments or communal funds. Still, the Khatam Sofer held that offering was impractical due to political concerns. The Temple Mount was under the control of Muslims, and which would not permit the offering. In the essay of the essay on the settlement of the land of Israel can be seen as an implicit response to this response of the Khatam Sofer. It rejects his claim one by one, including regarding the rabbinic principle that all ascend to the land of Israel, a decision brought by all halachic authorities, and the clarification of Maimonides' position. This entire polemic does not mention the name of the Khatam Sofer explicitly, even though the Satmar Rov brings him as an almost impenetrable authority in all other contexts. Indeed, particularly in the first and third essays of Vayoel Moshe, Teitelbaum quote eclectically from other writings of the Khatam Sofer and attribute grave halachic significance to them. One of these sources is, once again, Shut Khatam Sofer Chelek Yored De'ah. There, the Khatam Sofer determines that the Torah has no essential principle. Rather, every single letter constitutes a principle. The Torah thus must be observed even in eternal state of exile. The Khatam Sofer claimed that the Torah has no principle was intended to strengthen the Orthodox position that all aspects of biblical and rabbinic law are equally important. For if there is a principle, then there are also inessential aspects which could perhaps be abandoned or changed. Teitelbaum, in contrast, quotes this as a support for his anti-messianic position, according to which the only important of redemption is that it was promised in the Torah, and therefore must be believed just like any other statement of the Torah. In contrast, in his reconstruction of Maimonides' messianism in the essay of the Three Walls, Teitelbaum makes extensive use of the 13th principle of Maimonides, which Khatam Sofer rejected in the above quoted responsa. In the course of his reconstruction, Teitelbaum claims that the Zionists who took naturalistic redemption into their own hands before all Israel repented deny one of the 13th principles of Maimonides, that is, the coming of the Messiah. In this discussion, he attempts to remove all realistic relevance from Maimonides' messianism and locate it in an utopian future that cannot be manifested in the present or near future. In the essay on the Holy Tongue, Satmar Rov also quotes from the Khatam Sofer. One important citation is from the responsa of the Khatam Sofer Chelek Even HaEzer, where Sofer explains why Jews speak Jewish languages, such as Yiddish, which are apparently corrupted. This is, in his opinion, because of an intentional attempt by the ancients, Hakadmonim, to corrupt Gentile languages in order to prevent Jews from transgressing a ruling brought in the Palestinian Talmud against the speaking the language of the Gentiles. The question then is, if the Jews wanted to avoid speaking Gentile languages, why did they not speak the Holy Tongue? Teitelbaum finds the answer to this question in another remark of Khatam Sofer in his notes on the Shulchan Aruch. Concerning the Shulchan Aruch, remark that non-holy topics can be discussed in the Holy Tongue in dirty place. One of the important commentators of the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Avraham Avli Gombiner, died in 1682, wrote in his Magen Avraham that it is pious to refrain. The Khatam Sofer noted on this remark that this appears to be a reason why the Jews stopped speaking the Holy Tongue once they were exiled in Babylon. That land was full of abominations. That is why, in the Khatam Sofer opinion, the language was entirely forgotten by us. Teitelbaum argues that this is why, for the Khatam Sofer, the Jews needed to stay separate from the Gentiles by corrupting their languages rather than simply by speaking the Holy Tongue. In actuality, Khatam Sofer remarked that the language was entirely forgotten by us, like his remarks about linguistic corruption, were meant to strengthen the Orthodox opposition to speaking Gentile languages. The central focus of the Khatam Sofer is why not to speak the language that is not Jewish. The Satmar Rov uses these quotes against its initial intention to argue why the Holy Tongue never functioned as a national language and why it cannot be restored. This is the main narrative of the essay of the Holy Tongue. So what is happening here? The Satmar Rov devotes much of the essay of the settlement of the land of Israel to reject a central and influential responsa of the Khatam Sofer, which was based on a deep halachic and conceptual roots of the essential holiness of the land of Israel and the commandments to settle it. In parallel, in the essay on the three votes, Teitelbaum uses quote from the Khatam Sofer to affirm that there are no principles ikarim to the Torah in order to diminish the significance of the idea of redemption in Jewish history. And in the course of the essay on the Holy Tongue, he uses another quote from the Khatam Sofer to support his position that there is no historical basis for speaking the Holy Tongue and that it should be located in purely transcendental context. Of course, the original context of Khatam Sofer responsa in the original context of Khatam Sofer response, Orthodoxy was attempting to strengthen the ethnic and national aspects of Judaism as part of the struggle against the universalistic trends of Haskalah and reform. The Satmar Rov deconstructs the Khatam Sofer positions, is isolating their factors, and extract an anti-national narrative according to which there is no special importance to messianism or redemption in Judaism, but only to the observance of the Torah. The Torah itself has no essential or inessential aspect, and is absolute even in a state of perpetual exile. Likewise, there is no justification for Zionist attempt to restore the Hebrew language, for the language is not historical, and restoring it would make it lose its meaning. This is but an example of the Satmar Rov working method. In the extensive discussion, he opposes any midrashic or Kabbalistic tradition which supports national redemption or the historical position of nation. I will now just make some ending remarks, and that will be it. I will briefly conclude. Nationalism and orthodoxy are not basically separated phenomena, but rather symbiotic components which were simultaneously revealed in the raw setting of modern Judaism. Some major features of these phenomena emerge and develop within the framework of tradition, at least from the early modern period. During the era of Enlightenment, ethnic and national elements were intertwined with the exclusive discourse of radical orthodoxy, which strongly objected to the universal trends of Enlightenment. During that time, the ethnic exclusive elements of European Jewry were sanctified to their smallest details. Expression to this trend is to be found both in radical Orthodox discussions and in the writings of religious forerunners of Zionism, mainly Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer, which I mentioned. Haskalah added some elements to this equation, mainly the politicization of Judaism, and thus eventually all three phenomena dialectically shaped different aspects of modern Jewish national consciousness. After some sectors of Zionism revealed their secular educational intentions in the end of the 19th century, the trend which sanctifies the ethnic and national elements inverted, and an opposed process of profanation and contamination gained momentum. This process unifies some of the main features of radical orthodoxy in the 20th century. The writing of the Satmar Rov brings this process to its most radical conclusion. In his writing, he desanctifies and contaminates all the three major aspects of Jewish as any other nationalism: state, territory, and tongue. Nevertheless, this discussion occasionally reveals, in spite of the author's intention, the earlier stages of Orthodox national discourse in which the same components were sanctified and regulated as part of the overall national and political regulation of European societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take up to 10 minutes for questions. So let me invite questions. Yes. Please.
So do you differ with Professor Eliezer Rabitsky? You know, in his famous work, he seems to like vindicate that Satmar's like anti-Zionism was just part of like the 2,000-year. All the rabbis throughout the ages seem to.
Part of what, once again?
Professor Eliezer.
No, I heard the first one, but it was part of what?
It's part of like normative Judaism.
Well, I'm not sure that this is exactly what he said. You mean in Haketz Megoleh Medinat HaYehudim, he was talking about the influence of the Munkacher Rebbe, basically, and he has an essay there about the three vols in history.
Yes.
Well, no, I do not agree with that. I don't think it's a continuous. I think there are marks to this phenomena, but it's not a major track, I think, in Jewish history, especially not in modern times, when it is more and more basically the proto-national elements are being more and more basically they evolve. They are being developed mainly from the 15th and 16th century.
Rabbi Hirsch mentions it too in his Sefer Torah. Rabbi Hirsch, Samson Raphael Hirsch also mentions it, and even like Reform Jews seem to.
It's very hard for me
Rabbi
to.
Hirsch, Samson Raphael Hirsch,
Something Raphael Hirsch, yes.
and even the Reform Jews seem to like mention it, like or like Goyim, like they also seem to hint on it because they were also traditionally anti-Zionist.
Okay, but this is also okay. But this is previous to Zionism, of course. Samson Raphael Hirsch. So basically, there is the German path, which later became reluctant to Zionism, which is another branch. I spoke today about basically the more radical branches of Orthodoxy in Galicia and in Hungary, which basically they are located, they have different ideas, different developments related to different developments, to different notions of times and community, etc. This was basically my talk today, is about those schools.
Yes.
Thank you. How prominent is the Sitra Achra in the development of Rabbi Teitelbaum's work, and was this
In the development of what?
Rabbi Teitelbaum's framework, and is this something that he introduced into the process, much more so than the Moncai, the great Kanoi who preceded him?
Basically, the question of the Sitra Achra is very.
Tell them what that means.
It's basically the Sitra Achra is basically the other side, which means the demonic or devilish element, the devil himself, or devilish element. Anyway, it is very interesting the Sitra, this question of the devil, or in these areas. To my understanding, in Teitelbaum especially, it is more like a psychological aspect. Because the devil is the one which basically blinds the people. Samyut Einaim. He creates basically what is called Samyut Einaim, blindness, which prevent people from seeing the truth, the non-national truth for this. They are being attracted to to nationalism by the Sitra Achra, which is basically also like a continuity from the Chet HaEgel even. Also in Chet HaEgel, there is, in Al HaGeula Ve'al HaTmura, there is a famous midrash, basically, that the Satan, he came and he blinds the people and deceived them that Moses was gone, etc. He basically take this notion, and I think in a very also interesting way, after 67, when he tried to reject the idea that miracles were involved in this war, he said basically that the state was basically, this army was more powerful, the state, etc., etc., and basically what makes people think that it is miracles are involved is basically this deception, deception in consciousness, and this is basically Samyut Einaim and the major playground of the Sitra Achra or the Satan in his thought.
By the way, on that point, there's an objective fact.
Let me see if there are any other
Sorry.
questions. Other people have opportunity. Yes.
So fundamentally, his rejection of Israel, living in Israel, is based on his own feelings.
Right.
That's really, because the Chassam Sofer was not against it.
Was
So-
not?
Was not against living in
Of course, no, not at all.
Not at all.
As
Right. So in Pressburg, in that yeshiva, it was all pro-Israel. It was never, so this was just a personal issue.
there is a kind of legacy to the rejection of the language. There is a kind of short legacy which started mainly after the Kultura debate in the late 19th century, which made a strong division in the Jewish world. Eventually, it led to many people which basically left the Mizrahi. Later on, Agudas Israel was formatted and everything. Basically, this is a major departure point for this. And what I showed here basically is that Khatam Sofer has a very, very important and influential responsa, which the Satmar Rebbe basically deconstruct and dismantle and basically argument after argument without mentioning the Khatam Sofer name. While in many other places, the Khatam Sofer is of course a major and prominent, important figure.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I just,
How does it fit into his ideology that Chassidut was annulled? Nisbatla Torah Chassidut, which he writes in Vayoel Moshe.
Okay, that's so. That is.
Can you repeat the
Does it?
question?
Yes. The question is about the Satmar Rov. Basically, he has a notion in the end, I think, of מאמר שלושת השבועות, שדרך הבש נשכחה. The Hasidic path is forgotten. You meant that, right? And why does he say this? Why does he say that we have? Eventually, it also relates to the question that was asked here about Samyut Enaim and about the present situation of the consciousness of people in the present age, etc. So why was the Derech HaBesht, the path of the Besht, forgotten? Because many people said that early Hasidism, which is justified also by when we try to reconstruct the opinion of the Besht, and or a list of early Hasidism, that it was inclusive towards sinners. And some people said that since Hasidism is inclusive towards sinners, then now that we have like many sinners, then it is going like in the true Hasidic path by including them, not by separating, not by in terms of ideologies of separation, but in terms of ideologies of inclusion. So this was meant for some people, Derech HaBesht, the path of the Besht. And then he says, the path of the Besht is completely forgotten. The teaching of the Besht and his disciples were meant only for very, very particular people, and they saw the essence of the soul, shoresh, the root of the soul, shoresh nishmatam, when they spoke with them. And that is why, basically, these things were said. But today, we have absolutely we cannot reach this path anymore. It's closed, just like any other. Basically, I think the Satmar Rov says that all basically conscious historical paths are broken, scattered, shattered, whichever name you want to call it. And this is maybe, in this sense, the most deepest sense of exile which arises from his writings and teachings.
One more question? Yes.
May I go into the modern era for a moment?
Yes?
Okay. Where would you say, from your perspective, the line between Haredi and or ultra and non-ultra, or radical and non-radical Orthodoxy is?
Yes, well, I tried to give several examples to this. Basically, if we relate to radical orthodoxy as a strict, as in sense a strict separation from from the radical Orthodox to other Jewish groups, a very strong separation, which also exists, but more moderately in Khatam Sofer. Yeah. We speak about a conception of time, which is regressive and catastrophic in essence. For example, the Dino Vereb, which I personally think is the forerunner and basically the creator of radical orthodoxy, he believed in redemption in Shnat Tor, 1840. He died, this is my speculation, he died 1 year afterwards. Sorry? The Dino Vereb, the Rebbe of Dinov. Rabbi Tzvi Elimelech Shapira Midinov. So basically, when we speak about ultra or radical orthodoxy of the 19th century, the old scholarship, they spoke about basically the kind of splitting that arose in Hungary in the later decades of the 19th century, with people like Akiva Yosef Schlesinger, הפירוד בקהילות. Okay, the separation of inside the community in Hungary, etc. This is the old notion. I speak about basically general ideological and additional structures within these circles.
Let's know where you would draw that line today among contemporary Jewish groups.
Oh, this would be a bit hard because I think that radicalism today is not as radical as it used to be. Like,
Have you been to Brooklyn?
Basically there are some segments, and in Israel at least. In Israel, I can say that Haida Haredit, for example, today is not Haida Haredit of the 70s. Okay, so I guess Brooklyn of today, is not Brooklyn of the 70s or of the 60s. I'm not sure, but I think maybe it is not. But especially dealing with things that are being written. But there are, of course, people who continues and groups who continues these elements all over. And, but we have no real radical Orthodox leaders, I think, nowadays, especially not one which writes significant things.
Thank you very much. There was a request to make a minion for Myriv, so those who want to stick around for that, we'll go over here. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Shkoyach.
What's the Hebrew word you said for blindness? I'm not sure.
Samyut enayim.